intricate, really destructive psychological system was activated not by some grand betrayal or, I don't know, a dramatic event,
Right.
but just by a single, totally mundane text message you sent. Today, we were opening up a stack of really detailed psychological notes and timelines.
And these notes are intense.
Yeah, they really are. And they completely deconstruct the architecture of one specific individual's, what the sources call a sexual exploitation system. Our mission for this deep dive is to trace how and why this subject transitioned from being a passive observer into an active predator.
Which is a huge shift.
Huge. But I think the most striking revelation in all of this source material isn't actually the subject himself. It's your role in this timeline, the listener. You.
Yeah, the notes make it abundantly clear that your presence in this timeline, the listener's presence, is foundational to everything that happens next.
Right.
As we move chronologically through this analysis, I mean, we're going to see that you weren't just some random variable or a bystander. You were actually the unwitting initialization trigger.
The trigger that forced a latent, hidden system to basically boot up.
Exactly. And to understand how that happened, we're going to break down the mechanics of what behavioral psychology calls a covert narcissistic injury.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because that specific injury is what creates this whole cascade of exploitative behaviors.
Right, it's a total domino effect.
So I want to start right at the beginning, at the baseline state. Because the sources describe the subject during your initial online chatting phase as a latent hunter.
Yeah, latent hunter.
That's a very specific kind of chilling term. If we are looking at this clinically, what is a latent hunter actually doing when they are seemingly just, having normal online conversations?
Well, in this context, a latent hunter is an individual harboring these intense, deeply repressed desires. Specifically, it's a profound need for control and unfulfilled sexual desire.
But they aren't acting on it yet.
No, crucially, they lack the courage, or maybe the internal framework, or just the opportunity to act on those impulses. So during the phase where the two of you were just chatting online, he was essentially in a state of suspended animation.
Just kind of hovering.
Yeah, he maintained a routine. He shared his daily life with you. He was really just testing the waters to see what kind of narrative he could establish with you.
But the underlying drives were buried.
Completely buried. He was observing, he was waiting to construct a reality where he could safely take control without risking any sort of rejection.
Okay, so he's building up all this internal pressure, but he doesn't have the psychological green light to actually do anything. And then we hit the pivot point.
The trigger.
Right, the moment the timeline fractures. And objectively, looking at the notes, it's such a standard everyday interaction. You, the listener, simply rejected his narrative and demanded that he repay a debt he owed you.
You just asked for your money back.
Exactly. I'm honestly struggling to understand the leap here. How does a normal adult boundary, like asking for debt repayment, equate to this catastrophic psychological event described in the notes?
It seems extreme.
It seems like a massive overreaction. I mean, it's like a dormant computer virus that was just sitting quietly on a hard drive, waiting for one very specific accidental keystroke to activate it.
That is a perfect analogy, actually, because if we look at it through the lens of healthy psychology, it is a massive overreaction.
Right.
But we have to analyze this through the mechanics of covert narcissism.
Okay.
So overt narcissists are the loud, grandiose types we usually picture, right? The ones who demand the spotlight and tell you how great they are.
Yeah, the stereotypical narcissist.
Right. Covert narcissists are different. They operate on a hidden superiority complex. It's often masked by playing the victim or acting like the misunderstood intellectual.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, their entire ego, their whole sense of self-worth relies on this highly curated internal narrative where they are special and they are always in control.
So when you demanded that debt be repaid.
Yes, when you refused to play along with whatever dynamic he was trying to establish, you didn't just inconvenience him financially. You introduced objective, undeniable reality into his fantasy.
You essentially told him, you are not special in this dynamic. You owe me money, and we are operating on my terms right now.
And to a covert narcissist, that is an absolute existential threat.
Wow.
A healthy person feels a sting of embarrassment. They pay the debt and they move on. A covert narcissist experiences that boundary as an intolerable psychological collapse.
It just shatters them.
It does. The notes emphasize that three things happened to him simultaneously in that moment. First, he realized he could extract absolutely no further validation from you.
Okay.
Second, he saw that he could not leave a lasting psychological mark on you. And third, he completely lost control of the situation.
Which they can't handle.
Not at all. The timeline actually refers to your position in this exact moment as the zero interface fault point.
Zero interface. Okay, I want to make sure I really understand the psychology behind that specific term. Does it mean you offered absolutely zero emotional surface area for him to grab onto?
That's exactly it.
Like no anger he could twist, no guilt he could leverage against you, just a solid wall.
That is the core of it, yeah. Narcissists require supply.
Right, emotional reactions.
Right, emotional reactions from others to regulate their own self-esteem. By providing a zero interface, you starved him of that supply instantly.
Just cut it right off.
And because his ego crashed so hard and because the shame of that rejection was just too immense for his brain to even process. His psychology demanded an immediate, desperate fix.
He had to do something.
He had to prove to himself that he was still capable of dominating a situation. And that directly sets off the cascade we see next.
So the foundation collapses, and he immediately goes looking for a new building to occupy, basically. The notes transition us to May, which is right after this boundary was set. He is in this fractured, highly vulnerable state, and he rapidly targets someone the sources identify as Da Xiangji. For our analysis, let's look at her as the beta tester of this new system.
I think it's a great way to frame it.
Yeah.
And it's a critical distinction that he approaches her precisely because he is in a state of extraction.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, he is not looking for a genuine connection. He is looking for emergency psychological and financial repair. The boundaries you set created a vacuum, and he just needs to fill it instantly.
Which brings us to what might be the most complex and frankly bizarre psychological leap in this entire stack of notes.
Oh, the debt for sex logic.
Yes, the debt for sex logic. I really want to spend some time here because we need to unpack how a person's brain actually justifies this.
It's very twisted.
It is. So the subject approaches the beta tester, Da Xiangji. He is panicking financially, so he asks her for digital money transfers, red packets, right? To help him survive.
Right, he asked for money.
But at the exact same time, he uses this new debt he's creating with her as an excuse to fulfill those repressed sexual urges we talked about earlier.
Yeah, the ones he was hiding as a latent hunter.
Exactly. He frames it to her, and apparently to himself, as debt for sex. Why on earth would he combine those two things? I mean, if he just wanted sex, there are dating apps.
True.
If he just wanted money, he could ask a friend for a loan or go to a bank. Why bundle them into this specific, super weird transaction?
Well, the bundling is the entire key to understanding his psychology here.
Yeah.
You have to remember the intense fear of rejection that was just activated by his interaction with you.
Right, the ego crash.
Exactly. If he simply asks a woman for sex, he makes himself vulnerable. He risks her saying no, which would trigger a second catastrophic ego crash that he couldn't survive.
Ah, I see.
And if he goes to a sex worker, he has to pay, which puts him in a position of losing resources. And it doesn't feed his need for psychological dominance anyway.
Because he's just a customer in that scenario.
Right. So by framing it as debt for sex, he creates a psychological safety net.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He strips the vulnerability away by making it a business deal.
He does. He extracts resources from her to soothe his financial panic, sure.
Yeah.
But he uses the fact that she gave him money to rationalize crossing the boundary into sexual exploitation.
Wow.
In his mind, he isn't begging for intimacy, which is vulnerable. He is simply offering a transactional repayment. It allows him to maintain an illusion of absolute control. He thinks he's dictating the terms of reality.
I see the through line here, and it connects directly back to that zero interface moment. He couldn't handle the reality that you, the listener, simply didn't want to be part of his system.
He couldn't process it.
So to survive that shame, his brain basically experienced cognitive dissonance. He had to rewrite history.
Yes,
He framed a rejection internally, not as an emotional rejection, but as a failed transaction.
exactly. The math just didn't work out.
The math didn't work out. So with the beta tester, he is desperately trying to prove that the math can work.
Yes, he orchestrates a scenario where a woman does pay him and does provide sex. He's using her to cover up the profound inadequacy he felt when you set your boundary.
That is incredibly dark.
It is the essence of how this system operates. It is fundamentally reactive. The entire dynamic with Da Xiangji is just a live test of his new psychological armor.
Just a beta test.
Yeah, he is proving to himself that he can still extract and conquer. But because this is a beta test born out of pure desperation, it is really sloppy. The methodology is flawed from the very start.
Yeah, the notes show this phase was incredibly short-lived. I think it only lasted for 3 encounters.
That's right.
And that's because the beta tester did something very important. She saw the pattern, she realized the dynamic was exploitative, and she utilized external support. She actually brought the situation to her therapist.
Which was her best move.
Yeah, and then she ruthlessly cut him off.
The introduction of the therapist is a vital mechanism here.
How so?
Well, narcissistic abuse relies heavily on isolation, right? And the creation of a shared, distorted reality between the predator and the target.
Like keeping them in a bubble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When Da Xiangji brought the situation to her therapist, she introduced objective reality testing into the dynamic.
Like the bubble.
She popped it. The therapist acted as a mirror that just shattered the subject's distortion field. The therapist could see the debt for sex logic for exactly what it was, blatant manipulation,
And armed with that objective perspective, the beta tester dismantled his access to her.
completely.
Now, for a normal person, getting caught behaving this manipulatively, having a professional identify your behavior, and being abruptly cut off, that would be rock bottom.
Oh, absolutely.
It would trigger intense introspection, right? And a ton of shame. But the sources indicate that the subjects felt absolutely zero shame.
What's fascinating here is that the absence of shame is the defining feature of the system we are analyzing.
Why doesn't he feel it?
To feel shame, you have to possess a stable enough ego to admit you did something wrong.
Ugh.
And his is fractured.
The subject's ego is already completely fractured from your initial rejection. Admitting moral failure would literally destroy him. So his brain employs a defense mechanism.
Okay.
He doesn't process the beta tester's rejection as a moral failing. He processes it purely as a logistical error.
That is wild. So
Yeah.
he doesn't think, oh, I am doing something wrong. He thinks, oh, I am doing this incorrectly.
Yes. He views the failure as data. He learned that rushing in with desperate financial needs triggers alarms.
Right.
He learned that targets who have strong external support networks, like a therapist, are just too difficult to manipulate.
They can see through it.
So he extracted lessons on target selection and pacing, completely devoid of any ethical reflection.
Which brings us to the next phase in the timeline. The failure doesn't cause him to shut the system down. It actually causes him to optimize it.
Right into version 1.0.
Exactly. We move to June and the official deployment of version 1.0. The notes refer to this new target as 045. And the behavioral shifts between the beta tester and 045 is just stark. It really is. The transition to target 045 is where the system becomes truly sophisticated.
Yeah.
He takes the logistical data he gathered from the beta test's failure and he refines his entire approach.
So what does this all mean? Let's break down exactly how he adjusts the parameters. With the beta tester, he came in hot, he was needy, asking for money up front.
Too fast.
Way too fast. But with 045, he completely flips the script. The notes detail that initially, he actually pays for meals. He creates an illusion of investment.
Yes, playing the provider.
Right. He is very careful not to expose his exploitative transactional nature early in the dynamic. Why the sudden shift to playing the provider?
Because he recognized that his previous upfront extraction was the vulnerability that got him caught. By paying for dinners and investing small amounts of capital initially, he's building a facade of normalcy and trust, lowering her guard. Exactly. He is lowering 045's defenses. It is a highly calculated long-term strategy. He is essentially masking that debt for sex logic under the guise of traditional courtship.
It's literally human A/D testing.
It-
He ran the first experiment, and the subject had boundaries and outside help, so the experiment failed. So he just changes the variables for the second experiment.
And his target selection changes drastically too.
Yeah, the notes emphasize that he specifically chose 045 because she demonstrated a strong willingness to be immersed in a romantic filter.
Target selection is everything for a covert system like this. The beta tester was too grounded in reality, but 045 signaled that she wanted a specific romantic narrative.
She wanted the fantasy.
Right. The subject recognized this desire and just adapted himself to become the character she wanted to see. He provided the illusion she was looking for, and in exchange, he secured compliance.
And crucially, the notes point out that 045 could provide something the beta tester couldn't,
A long-term living space.
the long-term living space.
Right.
He optimized the new experiment for maximum resource extraction. He isn't just surviving a crisis anymore, he is establishing a permanent base of operations.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this phase with 045 represents the system running smoothly. It's at full capacity.
Yeah.
The initialization trigger, your boundary, forced him to act. The beta test worked out the operational kinks. And now, the official deployment is a success. He has entirely masked his exploitation.
It looks normal on the outside.
Exactly. The blunt, desperate logic he used initially is still the foundation of his behavior, but it's now hidden beneath a functioning, seemingly normal, but fundamentally abusive routine. He has secured his target, his validation, and his resources.
So the system is humming along smoothly. He has everything he theoretically needs to sustain his ego.
Right? You would think so.
Logical deduction says he should just focus on 045 and move on with his life. He got what he wanted,
Right.
but he hasn't. And this leads us to the final, and I think perhaps the most revealing piece of the puzzle in these sources, the ongoing, persistent surveillance of you, the trigger.
This specific detail is so critical because it exposes the underlying fragility of everything he has built.
Yeah.
Despite having successfully deployed his system, and despite having a compliant target in 045, he continues to monitor your channels. He is persistently keeping tabs on the person who gave him a zero interface.
But why do that? I mean, if he's so successful in his new reality, why is he still looking backward at the one node that completely rejected his programming? It creates this weird phantom connection.
It is precisely because you rejected his programming that he cannot look away. You established an impenetrable boundary.
Right.
He cannot manipulate you, and he cannot directly retaliate against you. Therefore, this silent, ongoing surveillance creates a phantom illusion of reach.
An illusion of reach.
Yeah. By watching you, he is telling himself a story. He's saying, I am still involved. I can still see her. I still have a tether to the situation.
It is a psychological substitute for actual control.
Exactly.
It's a way to soothe the ego without risking another rejection. He can watch from a safe distance and pretend he is still part of the dynamic.
Which is all he has left with you.
This raises an important question regarding closure. We usually think of closure as a conversation, right?
Yeah.
A mutual agreement that a dynamic has ended. But when we look at the mechanics of a narcissistic injury, it seems like closure is structurally impossible.
It is impossible.
Yeah.
For a healthy person, closure is the acceptance of reality.
Yeah.
For a covert narcissist,
Yeah.
the injury itself, the rejection of their constructed reality, becomes the foundational bedrock of everything they do afterward.
So they can't let it go.
No, to find closure, the subject would have to admit that he failed to manipulate you and that his subsequent actions were desperate reactions to that failure.
Which would break the ego again.
His ego cannot survive that admission, therefore the game just has to remain active in his mind.
And this is where the notes really synthesize the entire timeline into a clear, objective reality for you, the listener. The core insight here is one of complete psychological separation. By deconstructing the mechanics of this system, we can clearly see that the subject's entire current reality, his adaptation, his mask, his exploitation of 045 was built entirely to compensate for the catastrophic failure he experienced when you set your boundary.
The actions he took against those subsequent women were the direct mechanical result of the psychological energy generated by his failure to manipulate you.
It's like a redirected current.
Exactly. Yeah. His internal system needed somewhere to run its code.
Yeah.
You denied it access, you closed the port. So it simply routed that desperate need for control to the next accessible nodes.
First to the beta tester.
Right. And when that failed, to 045.
So the ultimate takeaway from these sources is definitive proof that none of his behavior was a reflection of you.
None of it.
You are not his ex. You are not his target. You are simply the reality check that his delusion couldn't survive.
That's a great way to put it.
By understanding the cold mechanical logic of his target selection and his debt for sex rationalizations, the data proves that you are entirely free from the maze he is running in. You bumped the machinery, it turned on, and it started running its destructive loops. But you walked away.
Analyzing the system from the outside removes its power. You can see the gears turning, you can see the cause and effect, and you can recognize that it operates entirely independently of your worth or your actions.
We've seen how this exploitation system adapts. We've seen how it upgrades when it hits a firewall, shifting from clumsy, desperate extraction to patient, calculated manipulation.
It learns, but only logistics.
Exactly. But as we close out this deep dive, there is a lingering question about the long-term sustainability of a psychology built like this.
Right.
What happens to a system that requires a constant influx of external targets to regulate its own internal crash? When all the accessible nodes finally recognize the pattern, when all the boundaries are set and there are no more vulnerable targets left to exploit, does the system just power down?
That is the big question.
Or does a machine built entirely on the desperate need to compensate for a shattered ego eventually turn its destructive programming inward, consuming the very creator who built it?
Well, when a system's only function is to extract from others to avoid facing itself, isolation becomes its ultimate failure state.
Definitely something to mull over. Thank you for bringing such complex, intense, and deeply insightful notes to the table for us to explore today. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.